Today we're going to be talking about InDesign tips and tricks for beginners. When I say beginners, I want to point out that I am assuming that you do know a little bit about InDesign already, but maybe you've been using it for a day, a week, a month, several months, but it's still frustrating. InDesign is frustrating, and there's a reason that InDesign is frustrating for you. That's because InDesign is a frustrating program. It just comes down to that. It is frustrating because it's an industrial strength professional tool. And I find that there are a lot of people who start using InDesign and they think to themselves, well, you know, I'll just pick it up. It should be intuitive. A lot of it is not intuitive. It's not you. It's not you not getting it. It's just the software itself can be very frustrating. And so we want to talk about some of those frustrations today, how to get around them, and some cool tips that you can use so that InDesign becomes more flexible, more fluid for you. I do want to point out that many of the things, I'm going to switch back here to InDesignSecrets.com, many of the things that I'll be talking about show up here on the InDesign Secrets site. And I always want to recommend to all new users that you sign up for the InDesign Tip of the Week here on the site. There's a little sign up on the right side there. Just pop your email address in there, then you'll get a confirmation email, I believe, and just excuse me, confirm that, and you will be getting a tip every week, and that will also help you get up and running in InDesign quickly. We have a lot of other stuff on InDesign Secrets that I'll talk about, but I just want to point out that those tips can be really helpful for not just new users, but intermediate and advanced users as well. Okay, so let's switch over to InDesign and dive right in. So here we are in InDesign. I've launched InDesign. I'm using InDesign CC 2019, but the stuff I'm talking about will work if you're using InDesign, an earlier version of CC, or InDesign CS6, or pretty much anything going back a number of years. So this will all be appropriate. It may just look a little bit different. One of the things that they started doing in InDesign CC a few versions ago was this thing called the start screen. And the start screen is just when you launch InDesign, you see this gray area, and you can, excuse me, oh, I must drink my fluids. Hold on. I'm coughing up a storm here. This will show you recent documents that you've been working on, or you can create new documents by clicking on the Create New Document here. I want to point out, though, that there's something important about this start screen. It's actually called the Start Workspace. And that's because, here's the first tip, you always want to pay attention to workspaces in InDesign. InDesign has a number of different workspaces that you can work in. This is just one of them. The Start Workspace is just one of the workspaces that you can work in. And the workspaces all live up here in this little menu up here in the application bar. This thing across the top is called the application bar. And you can find them in here up in this little pop-up menu, or you can also find it in the window menu. If you go to the window menu, you'll see a workspace submenu. And workspace submenu shows up here, and these are all different workspaces. And look at that. There's the one we're currently in, the Start Workspace. Some people don't like the Start Workspace for some weird reason. That's okay. You can change it. For example, I'll change it to Essentials, and you'll see that everything changes now to a whole different workspace. We see some tools, we see some panels, et cetera, et cetera. But I actually like having the Start Workspace when I don't have any documents open, so I'll leave it set to that. But that workspace turns out to be super important as you're working in InDesign. Let me show you some more. I'm going to create a new document. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here inside the new document dialog box. Suffice it to say, this is super important up here. There's the print, web, or mobile. If you're creating a new document, you typically want to make sure you're set to print. You might want to be set to web. You virtually never need to be set to mobile. That was a terrible mistake they made. So web just means everything's going to be RGB, everything's in pixels. You're probably not going to be doing that typically. Print is where you're going to want to start. I'm just going to create a new default document in here, and you'll see that now we're out of the Start Workspace and we're into the Essentials Workspace. And the Essentials Workspace has changed dramatically in the last couple of versions. I can't remember when. I guess CC 2019, they added this new Essentials Workspace. And this workspace is primarily, the new thing here is that it shows you the Properties panel along the right side. This area over here along the right side is called the dock. And the dock docks a bunch of your panels. They don't have to live there, but they typically do. And so over here in the dock, we have the properties panel and the pages and CC libraries. And Adobe is trying to get us to use this properties panel. And it's okay. It's a step in the right direction, but it's still a little bit rudimentary, I find, for most InDesign users. And so I like to have it open, but it's not the only thing I like to have open. Now, if you don't, and I'll talk about how to change that in just a minute, if you don't like this new CC 2019 Essentials workspace, you can go back to Essentials Classic. And I'll go ahead and choose that, and nothing happens. Isn't that nice? Reset Essential. There we go. I don't know if you noticed, nothing happened, but I just chose Reset Essentials Classic, and it took me back to what it's supposed to have looked like all along. If something doesn't look right when you're in a workspace, go ahead and choose Reset, and it'll set it back to the way it's supposed to be. That's an important tip. So here in my workspace, you'll see that I have just a few little other types of panels. I don't have the properties panel anymore, but I've got pages and layers. I'm just clicking on these names to open and close these panels. I also have this thing across the top called the control panel. Now here's the thing. I don't like Essentials, and I don't like Essentials Classic. I like something that's kind of something between the two. I like to have a little bit of both and more. So no matter who you are, even if you just started using InDesign a day ago, I recommend that you not use either of these and instead choose Advanced. Now, Advanced does not mean that you're an advanced user of InDesign. It just means it's going to show you more panels, more features. And these are features that you're going to want to be using. So choose Advanced. Now, you might want to change that a little bit. For example, you might want to go up to the window menu and turn on your properties panel. That's where your excuse me, your properties panel lives. All the panels, in fact, in InDesign live inside the window menu. I'll choose properties, and you'll see it opens it up way over here. That's crazy. Also opens this really, really dorky, stupid little thing that will go away pretty soon. Just ignore it. Try and ignore it. I hate that. But here's my properties panel, and I'm going to drag this properties panel all the way to the right side of my screen, not here inside this dock, but all the way to the right until I see a vertical blue line. And at that point, I let go, and now I get the properties panel over here on the right side. So I have two different columns in my dock now, my properties panel column, and then all the other panels that I want to see. And I like this look. I like this feel. Maybe I'll add some other panels as well, like I'll go to the window menu. Oops. Sorry, having a little webinar problem here. I'll go to the window menu and choose, say, Info, and that opens the Info panel. And here I can grab my Info panel and drag that into my dock over here. So you can see you can add and remove items from your dock. And this is really important. Why is this so important? It's important because the default settings for how Adobe set up InDesign is not very efficient. And it's especially not efficient because they don't know how you work. You work differently than I do, certainly differently than the folks at Adobe work. So you always want to customize InDesign to the way that you work, to the tools that you need in your work. There's no right way to do it. You just want to make sure that you are being as efficient as possible. So once you've set up the panels the way you want them, where you want them, and so on, I'm going to go back to my workspace menu here, and I could do this in the application bar, or I can go back to the window menu and choose workspace, and I'm going to say, give me a new workspace. And this new workspace is going to be called David's Awesome Workspace. You can call it anything you want. And then I'll click OK. And now it's saved. And I can always go back to this workspace when I want it. It'll always go back to this look and feel, or especially if I choose that reset feature. So that's an important feature, important tip in InDesign. Set up your workspaces to the way that you work. Now, once you have your workspace more or less set up to the way that you want it to look like, you're going to want to start laying out some pages, build some pages here, right? So let's talk about some of the features that you could use to do that. The second thing, you want to start making, you want to start using these tools in the tool panel. And while you're working, it's really important to learn some of the keyboard shortcuts. So some of the keyboard shortcuts are like the T key will jump to the Type tool. You don't need to learn a lot of keyboard shortcuts, but do yourself a favor and learn a couple of them. T, when you're not editing text, will give you the Type tool, and then you can drag out a text frame, a type frame, and then I can just start typing in there, right? Now, once you're in there, I can't hit any other keyboard shortcuts because I'm editing text. So you need to learn another keyboard shortcut, which is the escape key. Escape automatically switches back to the selection tool. That's the black arrow tool up at the top of the tool panel. So I now have the selection tool selected. I didn't click on anything on my page, but you can see that I now have the corner handles indicating that the item, the frame itself is selected. So I can move this around. Here's another little shortcut that you gotta learn as a beginner. Double click. You want to be double clicking on stuff all the time because it does all kinds of cool stuff, but especially with type tools, with text frames, because if you double click on a text frame when you have the selection tool selected, it will switch to the type tool automatically. So I didn't even have to press T there. It just switched. As soon as I double clicked on it, it switched to the type tool and placed my cursor inside that frame, which is really, really cool. So learn some of those keyboard shortcuts. Escape to go back to the selection tool, double clicking to jump into a text frame, and so on. Okay, let's see. We've got some other tools that you really want to learn about. Here I am editing text, right? I'm typing in my text frame. I'm going to zoom into 200% by pressing Command 2 on the Mac or Control 2 on Windows. And you can see I'm typing in, I don't know, Swedish or something. And I don't speak Swedish, but to me, that's what Swedish, if I could speak Swedish, it would look like that. So I'm typing in this text frame, and I want to temporarily go to the selection tool. So here's another keyboard shortcut, which is really important that you learn as a beginner. Hold down the Command key on the Mac or Control on Windows. And when you do that, you get the selection tool temporarily. So check this out. Right now I'm editing text. Now I hold on the Command or Control key, and now I can actually drag this this whole text frame around. I'm moving it around my page. And then when I let go of the mouse, let go of the Command or Control key, I go back to editing text again. So here it looks, we'll go back to fit the page and window with a Command or Control 0. I'm typing, hold on Command or Control. I can move the whole frame around because I have the selection tool temporarily. So some of those keyboard shortcuts are really, really helpful when you are when you're trying to move through InDesign and make it a more fluid experience. Here's another one. Let me zoom back into 200%, Command 2 or Control 2 on Windows. I want to pan. I don't want to move this frame. I want to pan, meaning I want to scroll the window, right? And I don't want to come down here and try and find this little scroll bar and scroll over to the left. No, I want to scroll, or I want to pan very fluidly. And the way you do that in InDesign is you hold down Option spacebar, or on Windows, Alt spacebar. And that gives you the hand tool temporarily. I don't know if you can see that on your screen, but on my screen I have the hand tool cursor. And now I can simply, with Option spacebar or Alt spacebar held down, I can scroll around. I can literally grab the page and move it to, in this case, over to the right. Excuse me. Let go of the Option spacebar or Alt spacebar, and now I'm back to editing text again. So more keyboard shortcuts that you really want to learn if you want to be efficient in InDesign. Okay. Let me talk about a couple other things. So we have very limited time today, so I'm kind of moving through this as quickly as I can. As I said earlier, it's really important that you customize InDesign to the way that you work, not just trust what Adobe thinks you should do. So one of the ways that you can customize InDesign to the way you work is by changing preferences. And the way you find preferences is different on Mac and Windows. On Windows, it's down in the bottom of the Edit menu, but here on the Mac, I go to the InDesign menu, and I can see a Preferences submenu. That's one of the only ways, by the way, in which InDesign is different between Mac and Windows. It's virtually the same on both, except for a few little things, and one of them is where the Preferences menu lives. So here inside Preferences, I can go to General Preferences, and you're going to be really overwhelmed here by the number of preferences there are in InDesign, and that's okay. You don't have to know most of these things. Most of these are really obscure. But there are a few things that I want to point out that are really helpful. First of all, you see different panes or areas within preferences down the left side here. And so, for example, I can change the appearance of my of InDesign. Do I want the darker or a lighter interface? You can change that here. If you don't like the dark gray pasteboard around your pages, you can turn that off. I really don't like that gray, so I like turning this checkbox off. And we'll see in just a moment there that the pasteboard is now going to be white, which I just find a lot easier to deal with. Inside the type pane over here, there is a preference here that I really, really strongly recommend you turn on, and that is apply leading to entire paragraphs. This is a feature that for 20 years now I've been complaining about, that the leading is line spacing, how much space there is from one line to the next in text. And by default, because this preference is turned off, the line spacing can change even in the middle of a paragraph, which is very bad most of the time. Sometimes it's actually helpful, but most of the time you don't want that. So I recommend you turn on apply leading to entire paragraphs, and your life will just get better in InDesign, because you just change the leading in one place and it changes through the entire paragraph. Does it the way it really should work. So turn that on. And this is what I mean by customize InDesign to the way that you work, to the way that you think InDesign should work, not just trusting blindly what Adobe thinks. So what else could we change? Oh, there's so many things we could change in here, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. Here's one little thing that you definitely need to know about, and that is units and increments by default are set to picas. I like picas and points. It's just the way I think in terms of measurements. But for a lot of people, it's not, and they want to use inches or millimeters or centimeters or something like that. This is where you can change this. Now, this change, when I make this change, in fact, most of the changes that I'm making so far, it's going to affect just the document I have open right now. It won't change InDesign for all documents, just the documents I have open right now. You can change your preferences with no documents open, and it will affect all new documents you create. And that's called setting your default preferences. When you change a preference with no documents open, you're setting your default preferences for new documents that you create. Not the old ones you've already made, but new documents you create. So this could be handy if you always want to work in centimeters, for example. You could change this while no documents are open. It'll change it for all your new ones. They'll all be set to centimeters. So anyway, you can change that. I can't stand working in anything except for picas and points, so I'm going to set it back. All right, you can see there's a lot of preferences in here. I recommend that you take a little bit of time to just explore. If you don't understand something, don't worry about it, but just explore it. One of the best ways to learn InDesign is to give yourself time to explore and play with it, and just what the heck is this about? Just get into it and start looking for things like, wait a minute, track changes? There's a track changes preferences. And then you think, wait a minute, that means there's a track changes feature in InDesign. And then you can go explore that, try and find that if you want. Maybe you need it, maybe you don't. But the more you know about InDesign, the better it gets. The more efficient you're going to be because you know more about the program. So just take some time and play around with all the stuff in here. Let me go ahead and click OK there, and talk about a few other things that you should know about. Now, I made this text frame using the type tool. I just used the type tool and dragged out a frame. But there are a lot of different tools in InDesign that you can use to make frames that you could put text in or images or whatever. Let's go ahead and zoom out again with a Command-0 or Control-0 on Windows to fit the whole page in the window. And I'll press the Escape key to get to the Selection tool. Then I'll press the Delete key to delete that because I don't want that anymore. So I'm keeping my hands on the keyboard, which is keeping me more efficient. I'm not having to go back and forth all over my screen trying to select tools. So let's say I want to make a new frame, and I'm going to put something in it, maybe picture, maybe text. There are, like I said, a lot of frames. A lot of tools I could use. I could use the type tool, but I could also use one of these tools down here, the rectangle tool, or even one of these shape tools. See how this is called the rectangle frame tool, and this is called the rectangle tool. And if I use the rectangle frame tool, I get a frame with a big X in it. And technically, that means it's a graphic frame, so graphics are supposed to go in it. But InDesign doesn't care, because if I grab my type tool and click on it, it turns into a text frame. It just changes. So any kind of frame can turn into any other kind of frame. Not a big deal. Same thing with this rectangle tool down here. This is a shape tool. This is technically designed to be just for drawing shapes. I've just drawn a rectangle. Or I can click and hold on this for a moment, and I get this little pop-up menu, and now I can get an ellipse or an oval. So I've just made a shape. but I can turn it into a frame that can hold text or images or whatever simply by placing something into it. Like, again, I can grab my type tool, and I will click on top of my ellipse there, and now I'm typing Swedish or Finnish or Norwegian or something into that frame. So anything can turn into anything else. Not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Don't get too caught up on what kind of frame you're using. Let's see. I do want to point out, though, that there are some differences between these frames. For example, this kind of frame, which I made with the frame with an X in it tool, the frame tool, this kind of frame, by default, does not have any stroke or fill. It has no background color and no stroke. You can see over here in the control panel, this is the fill color, this is the stroke color, and they have this little red line through it at a diagonal. That does not mean that it's scuba diving. This is a different kind of red line. This red line means it's transparent. There's no fill, no stroke, right? This one over here, if I click on this frame over here, which I made with my shape tool, it has no background color, but it does have a stroke color of black, and it has a 1-point stroke over here. Now, this is an important little thing that I want to point out to beginning InDesign users. It's super, super important to pay attention to what is selected or what's not selected on your page when you do anything. And this can make you crazy, but it's important to be a little bit vigilant here. Now, here's what I mean. Right now, I could go up here to my control panel and say 7 points and change this to red. And it doesn't seem to be changing anything, does it? Because nothing is selected on my page. But there is something changing. What's changing is your default settings for this document. Right now, my default setting is a red stroke of 7 points and a fill of yellow. And when does that show up? Well, it shows up next time I use any of these tools. So if I come over here to get my rectangle tool and I draw out a rectangle, boom, there's my yellow and red rectangle. Because I changed the default settings, and I changed the default settings because nothing was selected when I made a change. You always want to pay attention to what is selected or what's not selected when you click in something inside of a panel, when you change something inside the control panels. Just start becoming aware of, is something selected or not? Because if something is selected when you make a change, it applies it to that one object. If nothing is selected, like I'll click out here, nothing is selected on my page, then it changes my default settings. That turns out to be, that is one of the most common problems people get into with InDesign, is they start making changes with nothing selected on their page. And it doesn't seem like it would be that big of a deal, but it really it can make people crazy. Not so much with the yellow and red rectangles, but here's an example of when it really can make you crazy. Character styles. Now, we don't have enough time to go into styles and when to use paragraph and when to use character styles, but I will say, as a rule, and this is important, you want to first of all, the first rule is you want to use styles. You want to learn about paragraph and character styles and object styles in InDesign. If you're not using styles, you're not being efficient. So I'm not going to get into the details of how to make them and how to use them and so on today, but I do want to really emphasize that you want to get yourself to be using styles. It's a habit you want to get into. Here's the second rule of styles. Use paragraph styles when you want to apply formatting to a whole paragraph, all the text in a paragraph. Use character styles for when you want to change just a couple characters or a word or a sentence or something inside of a paragraph. Never apply a character style to an entire paragraph. This is a common newbie rookie tip, and you don't want to do it. Don't apply character styles to an entire paragraph. I'm just going to make a character style really quickly here. Again, don't worry about what I'm doing too much because I'm not trying to teach you how to do this. I just want to point out though that I've made a character style, and here's the big mistake. There's the third big mistake that people make with styles is I've made a character style. This is something I'm going to be applying to maybe just a little bit of text somewhere, maybe one word, and I click on it. And what just happened? Nothing was selected on the page, right? So if I make a change with nothing selected on my page, I've changed my defaults. I actually changed how InDesign is going to work. And this is a big problem because next time I make a text frame, let's go over here and make a text frame. I'm going to zoom into 200% with my Command 2 and use my Option or Alt spacebar trick to scroll over a little bit. And now I'm going to start typing. Wow, my text is colored cyan. It's blue. What the heck? What happened there? And if I didn't have any of my panels open, you might really be confused. Well, I made a change while nothing was selected on my page. So I changed the default. And the default that I changed is now this character style is being applied to everything, all my new text. That is a huge problem in InDesign, and you don't want to get into it. So I'm going to do a Command A or Control A to select all that text. Click on None. Most of your text should have none character style. Again, the character style would only be if I'm just applying it to a little bit of text inside of a paragraph. And you never want to choose a character style with nothing selected on your page because you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble. So these are a few tips, a few little tips that you really want to get into your head as a new InDesign user. But there's a lot more. There's so much more. You know there's so much more in InDesign. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And so I want to point out once again, you can learn way more tips at InDesignSecrets.com. You can get in here and we have all kinds of cool stuff on this site with tips and tricks. We have a podcast, the InDesign Secrets podcast, that Anne-Marie and I have been doing for years. And you can go back, and they're still relevant. You can listen to them all the way back, and you'll still find a lot of relevant stuff in there. We also have a magazine. I want to point out that we run InDesign Magazine. If you click on Magazine up here, you'll see a list of all the magazines, the back issues that we have. And if you become a premium member of InDesign Secrets, it's a small fee, but if you become a premium paid member of InDesign Secrets, then you get all the issues, all the back issues, plus all the templates. We've got a bunch of premium templates you can download. You have a private member forum, and you get 12 issues of InDesign Magazine a year moving forward. So you definitely want to check this out. It's like, I don't know what it is, like $5 or $6 a month. It's not a big deal to get an annual subscription. It's all in there. So I definitely encourage you to check this out. You can download a trial issue, by the way, up here at the top. Let me get to the top again. You can download this free trial issue, see if you like it. I believe that you're really going to like InDesign Magazine, so I'm going to encourage you to check that out. Also, I want to once again mention the InDesign Conference, which is part of CreativePro Week. CreativePro Week is for InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, PowerPoint, Keynote, Acrobat, PDF, EPUB, all that stuff comes together. But we have a special track which is just for InDesign, and so definitely check out the InDesign Conference. I think you'll like that. And if you want to learn even more, I have a bunch of courses on LinkedIn Learning, which used to be called lynda.com. One of my courses is the InDesign CC 2019 Essential Training, but there's Essential Training going all the way back. Whatever version you are using, you can find Essential Training courses for that. And Anne-Marie and I also do another course called InDesign Secrets. Imagine that. Once again, InDesign Secrets pops up. A bunch of these videos are free, so you can check those out. But if you do have a LinkedIn Learning membership, subscription, then you can watch all of them. Also, I should point out before we finish, oh my gosh, there's always more. Go to our YouTube channels, youtube.com/InDesign Secrets. See if I can get there. No, I can't because I can't type properly. And I can't type. Come on. There we go. youtube.com/InDesign Secrets. Knew I should have had that one up and running before I started. The InDesign Secrets channel on YouTube is also a great place to find all kinds of tips and tricks. So I hope there has been some helpful tips and tricks in here that will get you up and running with InDesign quickly. And now you know a little bit more about InDesign, and you know where to find even more information about InDesign moving forward. So thank you all so much for joining us today on this InDesign Secrets little online event.